The city skyline shimmered with glass and steel, but none of those towers carried as much weight as the ones with a single name carved into their foundations. Mercer Global. Jonathan Mercer's empire stretched far and wide. His construction company wasn't just a business, it was the skeleton of the modern city. Skyscrapers kissed the clouds, bridges tied rivers together, and luxury condos sprawled across coastal lines, all stamped with his name. Jonathan was the kind of man people noticed the moment he entered a room. Tall, broad-shouldered, his salt and pepper hair slicked neatly back, and a confidence in his stride that said, "I own this world." He lived at the very top of it, in a penthouse of glass walls overlooking the heartbeat of the city. At night, when the skyline glowed in 1,000 lights, Jonathan would raise a glass of aged scotch. The city laid out beneath him like his personal kingdom, and beside him was Cassandra. Cassandra Mercer wasn't just a wife. She was a symbol, elegant, statuesque, draped in designer gowns that shimmered under ballroom chandeliers. Her beauty made heads turn, her charm made rooms fall silent. Together, they were power personified. The king of steel and stone, and his queen of velvet and diamonds. Their son, Lucas, was the jewel between them. A boy of 8, dressed in pressed uniforms, his school bag carried by drivers, his weekends filled with private tutors and piano lessons. For him, the Mercer name wasn't just a legacy, it was a destiny. Jonathan believed nothing could shake it. He had fought from the dirt of his youth to the heights of global power. He wasn't just wealthy, he was untouchable. But life has a way of testing pride. It began on a quiet evening. Cassandra was hosting yet another cocktail party at the penthouse. Laughter spilling through gilded halls, wine glasses clinking, music drifting from a live quartet. The women shimmered in silk, the men boasted about deals and markets, and Jonathan, as always, was at the center of it all. Then his phone rang. First, he ignored it, but when the same number flashed again, urgency buzzed through his chest. He excused himself, stepping into his private study, the city glittering behind him. The voice on the other end was frantic. "Sir, it's the coastal condos. The storm hit harder than expected. We've got reports of collapses, units failing, families trapped." Jonathan froze. "What? That's impossible. Those structures passed every inspection." But as the voice went on, the truth clawed at him. Entire buildings reduced to rubble. Lives lost. Media already circling like vultures. His empire wasn't being celebrated tonight. It was being questioned, scrutinized, blamed. The next morning, headlines screamed across the city. Mercer Global under fire. Condo collapse claims dozens. Did billionaire cut corners? Luxury dreams built on cheap foundations? The scandal spread faster than the storm itself. Protesters gathered outside Mercer Global's headquarters. Former clients threatened lawsuits. Investors pulled out. Jonathan had faced storms before. He had clawed his way up against rivals, politics, even recessions. But this was different. This was blood on his hands in the eyes of the public. And Cassandra? She didn't stand beside him. Not once. In the boardroom, Jonathan was fighting fires. At home, Cassandra was sharpening knives. "I didn't marry you to live in scandal," she said coldly one evening, her diamond necklace catching the lamplight as she slid papers across his desk. Jonathan blinked, his tired eyes scanning the documents. "Divorce." His voice cracked. Cassandra's lips curved in a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "You're finished, Jonathan. The fortune is gone, the name is ruined. I won't drown with you." And just like that, she was gone. Within weeks, she was photographed in Europe. Champagne glass in hand, surrounded by new friends with old money, her laughter filling foreign ballrooms. Lucas, their son, was swept along with her, dressed in tailored coats, shielded from his father's downfall. Jonathan tried to fight back, but betrayal cuts deeper than bankruptcy. Worse still were the friends. The same men who once clinked glasses with him now smirked behind closed doors. In the cafes downtown, whispers floated in the air. "Mercer's finished. He built towers on sand. Without money, he's nothing." Jonathan would walk past, his jaw tightening as the words carved into him. The empire he once ruled was crumbling. His wife had abandoned him. His friends mocked him. His name was no longer spoken with awe, but with pity. And yet, as the storm raged, Jonathan had no idea that the people he thought mattered most would all vanish, and the one person he'd overlooked his entire life would soon become the anchor that saved him. Jonathan Mercer had built towers that reached the clouds, yet now he stood among ashes. The storm had passed, but the damage was permanent. Mercer Global was drowning in lawsuits. Investors scrambled to escape. Entire contracts collapsed like dominoes, each one dragging another into the fire. Jonathan's empire wasn't just wounded. It was burning to the ground. Government officials demanded inquiries. News anchors dissected his every deal. Protesters carried placards outside his offices, chanting his name like a curse. And Jonathan was a man at war with the mirror. He still wore the tailored suits, but the fabric sagged now, as though it too had lost faith in him. The salt and pepper in his hair spread faster, and his eyes, once sharp with ambition, carried shadows of sleepless nights. The final blow came quietly. He walked into his office one morning, only to find strangers sitting at his desk. Lawyers, accountants, administrators. They weren't here to help him. They were here to strip him. His bank accounts were frozen. His assets seized. The penthouse was repossessed. His private cars towed away like abandoned wrecks. All that remained was Jonathan himself, standing in a boardroom that had once bowed to him, now silent, cold, and empty. By nightfall, he was out on the street, carrying nothing but a suitcase. The skyline still glittered, but this time, Jonathan wasn't above it. He was beneath it, a man forgotten by the very world he had built. The whispers followed him everywhere. At a cafe, two businessmen leaned close over steaming cups. Is that Mercer? God, look at him. Doesn't even have a driver anymore. Shows you all it takes is one storm. Without money, he's nothing. Jonathan heard it all. He clenched his jaw, gripping the paper bag of groceries he could barely afford. Once, those same men would have rushed to shake his hand. Now they smirked as he walked past, milk sloshing inside the cheap plastic bag. His nights grew darker. He rented a one-room apartment with peeling wallpaper and a leaking faucet. The silence was suffocating. No laughter, no music, no Cassandra. Just the echo of failure pressing against the walls. It was in that silence that the memories hurt most. Cassandra's cold voice, sliding papers across the desk. Lucas's hand slipping out of his as Cassandra pulled him away. The photographs in tabloids. Cassandra smiling in Paris. Lucas dressed in designer coats, living the life Jonathan could no longer provide. One evening, as Jonathan sat in the dim light of a bare bulb, staring at his trembling hands, a soft knock echoed at the door. It was Evelyn. Evelyn, the housekeeper who had worked in their home for over 15 years. A woman Jonathan had barely noticed in his golden days. The one who ironed his shirts, polished the marble floors, made sure Lucas's toys were neatly tucked away. Her hair was streaked with silver, her hands calloused from years of quiet labor. She looked at him with no judgment, no pity, only steady kindness. "Mr. Mercer," she said softly, "you can't stay here, not like this. Come with me." Jonathan frowned. "I'll manage," he muttered, though even he didn't believe the words. Evelyn shook her head. "You and Lucas always had a place in my heart, and you'll have a place in my home. It's small, but it's safe. You shouldn't be alone." At first, Jonathan resisted. His pride screamed louder than his desperation. But that night, as he sat in the leaking apartment, he realized pride wouldn't keep him alive. So, with heavy steps, he followed Evelyn. Her home was nothing like the penthouse. A narrow two-bedroom apartment tucked above a quiet street. The wallpaper was faded, the furniture mismatched, the kitchen table scarred with years of use. The guest room smelled faintly of lavender and old books. It wasn't marble, it wasn't luxury, but it was warm. For the first time in months, Jonathan slept without the weight of cold silence pressing on his chest. The fall was brutal. Each morning reminded him of how far he had dropped. He went from marble floors to wooden creaks, from chefs to Evelyn's simple meals, from being the man who ruled boardrooms to the man who struggled to pay bus fare. And yet, in Evelyn's home, he found something he hadn't felt in years, a fragile kind of safety. Still, the world didn't let him forget. At the market, whispers followed him like shadows. Mercer? Didn't think I'd see him here. Funny how the mighty fall. Bet his wife's happier without him. Jonathan gripped the paper bags tighter, forcing himself not to react. He wanted to shout, to remind them who he once was, but all he could do was lower his head and keep walking. At night, Evelyn would notice his silence. She'd place a cup of tea by his hand, steaming, strong, with a faint aroma of mint. She never lectured, never scolded, just quiet presence, a reminder that someone still believed in him. One evening, as Jonathan sat staring at a blank page, head in his hands, Evelyn spoke gently. Pride won't feed you, Mr. Mercer. You have skills. Take what you can, even if it's small. Build again. For yourself. For Lucas. Jonathan closed his eyes. Her words cut deep, not in cruelty, but in truth. He couldn't rebuild his empire overnight. But maybe, just maybe, he could start again, brick by brick, contract by contract. And so, among the ashes of a life once untouchable, Jonathan Mercer took his first step toward rebuilding, though he had no idea how long and painful the road ahead would be. Jonathan Mercer had been a king. Now he was a man among the ruins. The world had already moved on. New tycoons filled the headlines. Cassandra was dazzling at gala events with Lucas by her side, and Jonathan's name appeared only in whispers, usually with a smirk attached. But inside Evelyn's small apartment, Jonathan began to discover a different rhythm. The mornings no longer started with maids pulling back velvet curtains. They started with sunlight slipping through faded lace curtains, the smell of frying eggs, and Evelyn humming an old tune in the kitchen. At first, he sat at her table like a guest, awkward in the smallness of it all. But soon, he found himself washing dishes, fixing the squeaky door, even helping Evelyn carry groceries from the market. They weren't grand gestures, but they made him feel human again. One morning, Evelyn slid a newspaper toward him. You've been staring at the walls too long, Mr. Mercer. Time to move. The classified ads stared back at him. Driver wanted. Store clerk. Delivery assistant. Positions Jonathan Mercer would never have considered in his past life. His pride resisted, but hunger was louder. So Jonathan took a job. It wasn't in a skyscraper. It wasn't even in an office. It was at a small hardware store on the edge of the city. The first day was brutal. Customers barely glanced at him. The manager, a stout man with little patience, barked orders like Jonathan was invisible. He swept floors, carried boxes, and restocked shelves until his muscles ached. But when he returned to Evelyn's apartment that night, exhausted and covered in dust, she greeted him with a warm smile. You worked hard. That's what matters. Jonathan sat down, his hands blistered, but his heart a little steadier. Days turned into weeks. The work didn't get easier, but Jonathan did. His body adjusted. His pride began to bend, to soften. And in the quiet of the store, he sometimes overheard men talking about deals, contracts, and ventures. The language of his old world, a language he still understood better than anyone. One afternoon, a contractor walked in, frustrated over supply shortages. Jonathan, unable to keep quiet, offered a suggestion. A cheaper supplier, one he remembered from his days in business. The contractor blinked, surprised, then smiled. That's good advice. Thanks, Mercer. That night, Jonathan felt something stir inside him, the ember of who he once was. Slowly, he began writing again. Not grand business plans, but notes. Ideas for logistics, small supply chains, ways to save costs. He scribbled late into the night at Evelyn's kitchen table, the paper covered in his looping handwriting. Evelyn would glance over, shaking her head with a smile. Once a businessman, always a businessman. But Jonathan wasn't alone. Sometimes, he would see Lucas in the park, playing soccer with Cassandra's new friends. Jonathan never approached. Cassandra's glare was warning enough. But Lucas would sometimes glance back, eyes searching, as if hoping his father would step forward. It broke Jonathan's heart. He longed to hold his son, to tell him he wasn't gone, just broken. But Cassandra guarded him like treasure she didn't want Jonathan to touch. Still, that glimpse was enough. It reminded him why he was fighting. One rainy evening, Evelyn found Jonathan staring at his scribbled notes with his head in his hands. "It's useless," he muttered. "No one will trust me again." Evelyn placed a steaming cup of tea by his hand. "You lost an empire, not your mind. The world still needs what you know. Maybe not at their tables, but you can build your own again. Small, honest, different." Jonathan looked at her, seeing in her eyes the faith he couldn't find in himself. And for the first time he believed her. The rebuilding didn't happen overnight. He started small, helping the contractor he had advised, drawing up cost-saving charts in exchange for modest pay. Word spread slowly, quietly, that Mercer still knew how to make numbers work, that even in ruin he hadn't lost his touch. Clients trickled in. Tiny jobs, nothing glamorous, but each one was a brick in the foundation of something new. And through it all, Evelyn was there, with her tea, her quiet encouragement, her unwavering presence. She never demanded, never judged. She simply stood by him, a reminder that strength wasn't always loud. Sometimes, it was steady, constant, and silent. Jonathan's suits no longer hung on him like empty shells. He tailored them again, not for boardrooms, but for himself. His back straightened. His eyes regained their spark. The whispers didn't stop. They never would. But Jonathan had begun to learn something he never knew in his days of wealth. Whispers can't break a man who knows how to stand in silence. And though he was still far from reclaiming his empire, Jonathan Mercer had planted the seeds of rebuilding. He didn't know it yet, but those seeds would one day grow into something stronger than he ever imagined. Cassandra Mercer had always lived for appearances. The glittering gowns, the cameras flashing at galas, the way people leaned closer when she walked into a room. It was her kingdom, and she ruled it flawlessly. But kingdoms built on vanity rarely last. At first, her new life seemed perfect. Lucas by her side, a parade of investors wooing her with opportunities, and the attention of men who whispered promises sweeter than champagne. But behind the sparkle, cracks were forming. The investors she courted were sharks. They smiled for the cameras, but behind closed doors, they demanded more than Cassandra could give. Her charm opened doors, but charm doesn't balance books. The money Jonathan had left her was bleeding fast. Parties, travel, designer clothes. And then came the whispers. Rumors that Cassandra had turned Jonathan in, that she had whispered secrets to his rivals, feeding them the very rope they used to strangle Mercer Global. First, she dismissed them. But whispers grow teeth. Soon, doors began closing. Invitations stopped arriving. The cameras still flashed, but fewer, dimmer, like lights fading on a stage. Lucas noticed before anyone else. At 12 years old, he wasn't blind. He saw the bills piling on the marble counter. He saw the arguments behind closed doors with Cassandra's advisors. He heard the word debt whispered like a curse. One night, Lucas asked quietly, "Mom, are we okay?" Cassandra forced a smile. "Of course, darling. We always will be." But Lucas wasn't convinced. He missed his father. He missed the warmth of Jonathan's presence, the man who had once carried him on his shoulders and told him stories of building towers. The man Cassandra insisted was gone, ruined, irrelevant. And yet, when Lucas caught glimpses of Jonathan in the park, older, tired, but alive, something inside him ached. Meanwhile, Jonathan was climbing in his own quiet way. The small contracts had grown into steady work. Contractors trusted him. Small business owners leaned on his advice. His reputation, though scarred, began to stitch itself back together. He was no longer Mercer the tycoon. He was Mercer the fixer, the man who could turn chaos into order. And Evelyn was there through it all, watching him stay up late with papers spread across her worn table, bringing him tea when his hands shook, reminding him gently that Lucas was worth every struggle. Then the storm hit Cassandra. One by one, her investors pulled away. The rival magnates she had cozied up to discarded her like an old accessory. The debts piled higher. Her credit cards were cut. The penthouse she fought so hard to keep slipped through her fingers. She screamed at lawyers. She begged old friends. But no one stayed. In desperation, Cassandra clung tighter to Lucas. She dressed him in his finest, parading him at dinners as if his presence alone would restore her fading glow. But Lucas wasn't blind. He saw her fear. He felt her tightening grip. And more than anything, he missed his father. It was Lucas who broke the silence first. One evening, as Cassandra tried to rehearse a smile in the mirror, Lucas said softly, "Mom, I want to see Dad." The words shattered the room. Cassandra's reflection froze. Her chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths. "You don't know what you're saying," she snapped. "Your father ruined us. He abandoned us." But Lucas shook his head, eyes steady. "No, you abandoned him." The slap of truth hung in the air. Cassandra turned away, tears stinging, because deep inside, she knew he was right. Meanwhile, Jonathan's path crossed with Lucas in the most unexpected way. One afternoon, while consulting at a warehouse, Jonathan heard a familiar voice behind him. "Dad!" He turned, and there was Lucas. Taller, older, his eyes wide with disbelief. Jonathan's breath caught. For a moment the world spun. He wanted to run, to grab his son, to apologize for every absence. But he stood frozen, afraid this was only a dream. "Lucas!" His voice cracked. Lucas didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, wrapping his arms around Jonathan's waist. Jonathan held him, trembling, his heart breaking and healing all at once. Tears fell freely as Lucas whispered, "I never stopped waiting for you." That reunion was the spark Jonathan never knew he needed. His rebuilding wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for Lucas, for the chance to show his son that a man could fall and still rise again. Cassandra, watching from the distance, felt the ground collapse beneath her heels. She had tried to erase Jonathan from their lives, but here he was, alive, rebuilding, reconnecting. And for the first time she realized, she had lost more than money. She had lost her grip on the one thing she had used to hold power, Lucas's heart. Her kingdom was crumbling, and karma was collecting its debt. The storm had passed, but its wreckage remained. Cassandra's name, once synonymous with elegance and social power, was now whispered in pity. Her debts had mounted beyond repair. Her so-called friends had vanished. Invitations dried up. Even the penthouse she clung to slipped into the hands of creditors. She stood alone in a half-empty apartment, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. Her diamond necklace caught the city's lights, the last jewel she hadn't pawned. For years, she had measured her worth by glitter and applause. Now all she heard was silence. But her greatest loss wasn't money. It was Lucas, her son, once her anchor and her accessory, now slipped through her grasp. The boy who once looked at her with trust now asked for his father instead. And Cassandra, though she fought to deny it, knew the truth. Jonathan had given Lucas something she never could: stability, integrity, a love not measured in material things. Jonathan's life, meanwhile, had transformed. What began as small consulting jobs grew into something stronger. With Evelyn's unwavering support, Jonathan launched a new firm, Mercer Solutions. Not a sprawling empire like before, but a lean, resilient company built on trust and transparency. Where Mercer Global had collapsed under pride, Mercer Solutions thrived on humility. And Lucas was there to see it all. He sat at his father's side, wide-eyed, watching Jonathan rebuild brick by brick. The boy who once doubted now believed. Sometimes, after long days, Jonathan would tuck Lucas into bed in Evelyn's modest home. The wallpaper still faded, the furniture still old, but for Lucas it was a palace because it was filled with love. Evelyn, the quiet strength behind it all, never sought the spotlight. She cooked meals, offered advice when Jonathan faltered, and reminded him that scars were proof of survival, not shame. She became more than a caretaker. She became family. One evening, after months of steady growth, Jonathan was invited to speak at a business summit. The room was filled with cameras, microphones, and curious eyes. For many, it was the first time they had seen him since his fall. Reporters leaned forward as Jonathan stepped onto the stage. He no longer wore the arrogance of a tycoon. His suit was sharp, but his posture carried something deeper: humility and hard-earned wisdom. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "I lost everything once. My wealth, my reputation, my friends, even my family." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "But in losing it all, I discovered the truth. Money can burn. Friends can vanish. Love can betray. But real wealth is in who stands beside you when the world walks away." The room fell silent. Cameras clicked furiously. And then, slowly, applause rose like a wave. But Jonathan wasn't speaking for them. At the back of the hall, Evelyn stood quietly, Lucas's small hand in hers. Tears shimmered in her eyes as Jonathan's gaze found them. His words were for her. For the woman who had opened her door when no one else would. For the son who had never stopped waiting. Cassandra wasn't there, but she heard. She read the headlines, saw the images of Jonathan standing tall once again. And when she saw Lucas, beaming beside him, her heart twisted. For years, she had chased power and prestige. But now she understood. She had traded away the only thing that truly mattered. Her kingdom of glass had shattered. And Jonathan had risen from the ashes, not to reclaim her, but to live free of her. The night after the summit, Jonathan returned home to Evelyn's modest house. Lucas was asleep on the couch, books scattered around him. Evelyn was in the kitchen, humming softly as she washed dishes. Jonathan stood in the doorway watching her. For a moment, the memories of marble floors and chandeliers flickered in his mind. But then he looked around. The faded wallpaper, the rattling windows, the worn table where his second life had begun, and he smiled. This wasn't the empire he once ruled, but it was everything he needed. He stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Evelyn's shoulder. She turned, surprised, her tired eyes meeting his. "Evelyn," he said softly, voice thick with emotion, "you saved me. Not just me, you saved Lucas too. You showed me what family really means." Evelyn shook her head, her voice quiet but steady. "No, Jonathan, you saved yourself. I just reminded you of who you are." Jonathan's throat tightened. He pulled her into an embrace, holding her as tightly as he had once held his fortune. Only this time he knew. This was wealth that would never burn. From then on, Jonathan Mercer's story was told not as the man who lost everything, but as the man who found something greater. For Lucas, he was no longer a father buried in headlines, but a hero who showed him that falling wasn't the end. For Evelyn, he wasn't just a fallen tycoon, but a man reborn with gratitude and love. And for Cassandra, she became the cautionary tale. The woman who traded loyalty for luxury, only to find herself alone in silence. Jonathan didn't seek revenge. He didn't need it. His life, rebuilt with love and resilience, was proof enough. Because in the end, true wealth isn't measured in towers of glass or millions in the bank. It's measured in the hands that hold you when the fire has burned everything else away. Jonathan had fallen, but he had risen higher than before, and this time he would never fall again. Before we continue this video, please take a minute to subscribe, comment, and share. Turn on the notification bell so you can get notified whenever we share amazing stories you would absolutely love. Thank you for watching. The skyline shimmered in amber light, towers stabbing the horizon like monuments to ambition. Yet among them stood one building that wasn't raised in arrogance, but in redemption. Its name, Mercer Global Foundation. Inside, an older man sat at his desk. His once dark hair now streaked with silver, his hands lined with years of loss and rebuilding. He no longer wrote for shareholders or reporters, but for one person alone, his son. Success is not about what you build, but what survives after you are gone. Wealth is fleeting, but character is eternal. The sound of a door creaking interrupted his thoughts. A boy stood there, tall for his age, with a strong jawline and piercing blue eyes. 16, yet already carrying the look of someone destined for more. "Dad? You ready?" The man's face softened. He closed the journal. "I'll be right there, son. Just finishing a thought." The boy smirked. "Another one of your lessons?" With a chuckle, the reply came. "Something like that. You'll understand them better when you're older." Scene fades into a warm home, filled with light and laughter. The Mercer household was not what it once had been. No marble halls, no glittering chandeliers, just wooden floors, shelves of books, and family photographs smiling down from the mantel. And there was Evelyn, her silver-streaked hair tied neatly back, her hands weathered but strong as she set dinner on the table. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had lived both servitude and freedom, and chosen family above all. "Jonathan, you need more greens," she teased. "Potatoes won't keep you alive forever." A laugh filled the room. "I'm not 12. From across the table, his son chimed in, laughing. "She's right. You always go for the potatoes first." The laughter rang out, warm and full, echoing against the simple walls of their home. This was wealth of a different kind, not measured in gold, but in love. The boy leaned forward, excitement flashing in his eyes. "We're working on renewable energy models at school. Mine's about solar grids for small towns. If it works, a whole community could run on it." Pride glowed in the father's eyes. "That's incredible. That's the kind of thinking the world needs. Big solutions, for real people." The older woman smiled warmly. "You're going to do great things, child. I can feel it." The boy blushed, but didn't hide his grin. Music shifts. The warmth fades into shadows. Not far away, another life unfolded. A life in ruins. In a cramped apartment, a woman sat before a cracked mirror. Once she was a queen of galas, bathed in diamonds and champagne. Now her beauty, though still present, was dulled by bitterness. Her hand trembled as she held a tube of lipstick. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Don't make the mistake I did. Don't abandon love for luxury. Don't trade loyalty for greed. Because when it all burns away, you're left with nothing but shadows." The lipstick slipped from her hand and clattered onto the table. Her reflection stared back at her, not with pride, but with regret. Once, she had laughed when the man she left behind fell from grace. Now laughter haunted her. Letters and cards she had written were tucked away in silence, unanswered. The boy she abandoned had grown distant. And who could blame him? Soft piano returns, contrasting the light of one family with the loneliness of another. The man who had lost everything now lived a life rich in love. With Evelyn by his side, and his son by his heart, he had found a wealth no fortune could buy. But the world is never still. Just when the foundation feels unshakable, life finds a way to test it. And soon, this family's legacy would face trials neither father nor son could ever have foreseen. The boy stood tall on stage, clutching a certificate as the crowd cheered. At 16, he had already earned recognition for his groundbreaking project in renewable energy. But what shone brightest that night wasn't the award in his hand. It was the pride in his father's eyes. Among the sea of parents and teachers, Evelyn clapped the loudest, her cheeks wet with tears. She had raised him like her own, guiding him with quiet strength. And now she saw the promise of the future unfolding before her. But in the shadows of the crowd, someone else was watching. A woman in a simple coat, her once golden hair now dulled with streaks of gray. She watched him with trembling lips, her hands tightening on the strap of her bag. Regret cut deeper with every clap of applause that wasn't hers. Scene shifts. A quiet night, father and son sitting on the porch. "Dad," the boy said softly, "when people hear my last name, they still whisper. Some remember you as the billionaire who fell. Others, as the man who rebuilt from nothing. Which one am I supposed to be?" The older man smiled faintly, staring out at the stars. "You are not my past. You are my future. Let them whisper." What matters is what you build and who you become. The boy's eyes glistened, his jaw tightening. Then I'll make the name mean something again. I promise. The father placed a hand on his shoulder, steady, reassuring. It already does. To me. Music lifts, transitioning to a university campus. The years moved quickly. The boy grew into a young man. His ideas turned into patents. His projects became companies. While his peers chased wealth, he chased purpose, energy solutions for the poor, innovations for the planet, ideas that mattered. The Mercer name began to rise again, not through scandal or empire, but through integrity. Reporters came. Interviews followed. They called him a visionary, the son of a fallen tycoon who had rebuilt the family's honor. But not every headline was kind. Some dug into the past, reprinting photos of his mother at galas, his father in handcuffs, the empire's fall from glory. And each time, the young man's chest tightened. At night, when the cameras were gone, he would stare at those clippings. And sometimes, in the quiet, he wondered if he was strong enough to carry a name so heavy. Scene fades to Cassandra's apartment. Meanwhile, the woman who once turned her back watched from afar. Television screens filled her small living room with images of the son she had left behind. Every award he received pierced her like a blade. She whispered into the silence, "That's my boy, my son." But when the knock of loneliness echoed in her apartment, no one answered. She thought of reaching out, to him, to the man she had betrayed, but shame pulled her hand back every time. So instead she wrote letters that piled up in a drawer, letters she never had the courage to send, letters that began with "I'm sorry" and ended with "I wish I had chosen differently." Music softens to melancholy. In one world, a young man rose, carrying not just the dreams of his father, but the scars of his family's past. In another, a woman aged in silence, her beauty fading, her laughter gone, her life trapped in what-ifs. The wheel of life was turning, and soon, paths that had long been separate would cross again. The young man had become a force of change. At 25, he wasn't just Jonathan Mercer's son. He was his own name, his own vision. His company lit up forgotten towns, brought clean water to villages, and offered hope where there had only been struggle. Crowds cheered when he spoke. Investors lined up to back his projects. Headlines read, "From legacy to leader, the rise of a new Mercer." And through it all, his father and Evelyn remained his anchor. They stood behind him not as shadows of the past, but as pillars of strength. Yet, for every light, there is a shadow. Scene shifts. A quiet cafe in the city. Across from the glass window sat a woman, hands trembling as she clutched a coffee cup. Her eyes were fixed on the newspaper in front of her, his face smiling from the front page. Her lips quivered as she whispered, "My son." The years had not been kind. Regret etched deep lines into her face, and loneliness sat heavy on her shoulders. For so long, she had avoided him, afraid he would see her only as the woman who walked away. But now, she could no longer bear the silence. She folded the newspaper carefully, stood, and left. Scene transition. A crowded auditorium, flashes of cameras. The young man had just finished delivering a keynote speech. Reporters swarmed, eager to capture his vision. And then, through the sea of faces, his eyes caught sight of someone who seemed impossibly familiar. A woman standing near the back, her hair streaked with gray, her face older but unmistakable. His heart lurched. She didn't speak. She only smiled softly, almost shyly, before disappearing into the crowd. Confusion tore at him. That face, it couldn't be. But deep down he knew. That night, he asked his father quietly, "Did she ever try to find us?" The older man's eyes darkened. He hesitated, then said softly, "She made her choices, son. Some doors, once closed, are better left that way." But the young man couldn't let it go. Not when the echo of that face kept haunting him. Scene fades into Cassandra's small apartment. She sat at her desk, hands trembling as she wrote once more. The words spilled like tears across the page. I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know I regret every moment I wasn't there. You are everything I should have cherished. I am proud of you, even if I have no right to be. This time she sealed the envelope. This time she sent it. Scene shift, Jonathan's home. The young man opens the letter slowly, Evelyn and his father nearby. The words pierced him. He read them once, twice, 3 times, before lowering the paper with trembling hands. His chest rose and fell sharply. She's been watching me. All these years. The older man's face hardened. Don't let her poison your life again. But Evelyn placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Blood is blood, Jonathan. A son deserves to know his mother's heart, even if it's broken. The room fell into silence. A silence heavy with choices, with past wounds reopening. Music swells to tension. The young man stood at a crossroads, between the loyalty of the family that raised him, and the broken woman who had abandoned him but now sought a fragment of redemption. And soon, the decision he would make would change everything. The young man stood alone, the letter trembling in his hands. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as though it carried not just words, but years of absence, regret, and unspoken longing. Outside, the city pulsed with life, lights flickering against glass towers, cars moving like slow rivers along slick streets, and the hum of a world he had helped shape. Yet, in the quiet of his study, it all seemed distant, almost unreal. He looked down at the letter again, tracing the edges with his fingertips. Each crease seemed to whisper a story of the past, of mistakes that had carved deep scars in both their lives. And yet, beneath the weight of anger and betrayal, curiosity stirred. Could the woman who had abandoned him truly seek to make amends? Could she want more than to just ease her own guilt? Could she want him, his trust, and a place in his life? Memories came unbidden, vivid and sharp. He remembered the nights he had cried alone, clutching his pillow in the dark, whispering her name into the emptiness. The mornings he had woken to the reassuring embrace of his father, whose steady presence had been a lifeline, and Evelyn, whose quiet smile had reminded him that someone could love him unconditionally. He thought of all the times he had dreamed of her, even knowing, even resenting, that she had walked away. Those dreams had been both a balm and a wound, a constant reminder of what he had lost. He realized something profound. His past did not define him. It had shaped him, yes, but it did not dictate the choices he would make now. The lessons of pain and abandonment were not chains to hold him down. They could be guides, if he allowed them. Meanwhile, Cassandra sat at a small table in a quiet cafe, the hum of conversations around her barely reaching her ears. Her hands fidgeted with a coffee cup, twisting it over and over as she tried to steady her racing heart. She had spent years rehearsing this moment in her mind, imagining every possible outcome, every reaction he might have. But nothing had truly prepared her for the reality. The fear that he might reject her, the fear that he might never forgive her. Time seemed to stretch, every second drawn out into a lifetime. She glanced at the door again, her heart leaping and sinking in the same instant as the young man entered. He paused at the threshold, scanning the room. For a long moment, he seemed almost hesitant, as if the years of absence had built an invisible wall between them. And then he saw her, older, tired, yet undeniably human. She had no grandeur about her, no pretense, just someone who had survived, someone who had carried her regrets like a heavy cloak. In that instant, all the anger, all the resentment, all the longing he had felt over the years surged together, and for a moment he didn't know what to feel. "I never stopped thinking of you, never stopped hoping," she whispered, her voice trembling, fragile yet full of conviction. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he let the silence stretch. And in that silence, he understood something crucial. Forgiveness was not just about her. It was about him, about reclaiming his life, about letting go of the resentment that had weighed him down, about stepping into the man he wanted to be, unchained from the bitterness of the past. The days that followed were tentative. Walls that had seemed unbreakable began to show cracks. Conversations that had been impossible for decades became careful bridges, each word a step toward understanding. They spoke of small things first, the weather, the city, memories that were lighter, easier to share. Then came the heavier stories, the moments that had haunted them both. The nights of pain, the missed milestones, the birthdays that had passed in silence. They laughed at moments they had forgotten, and they cried for moments that could never be reclaimed. It was not easy. Every word brought up old wounds. Every gesture reminded them of the time they had lost. And yet, through the pain, they discovered something that had always been there. A bond that neither distance nor time could completely sever. Meanwhile, the young man continued to build his world outside this fragile reconciliation. His company expanded its reach, bringing light to towns that had long known darkness. He poured himself into projects that mattered, yet the lessons of forgiveness began to seep into his leadership, into the way he treated colleagues, partners, and those in need. He realized that healing others required first healing himself. And forgiveness, he discovered, was a power far greater than any innovation or success he had ever created. His father and Evelyn watched quietly from afar. They did not intervene. There was no need. The young man had grown into someone capable of making his own decisions, someone strong enough to balance the lessons of the past with the promise of the present. They saw the tension in his expression, the flicker of doubt in his eyes, but also the determination to face it, to confront it, and to choose wisely. And yet, life is never without its tests. Even in the glow of tentative reconciliation, shadows of doubt lingered. Could he fully open his heart again? Could he trust that the love he had lost could return without the pain that had accompanied it? Could he forgive completely not just her, but himself, for the anger and resentment that had once consumed him? The young man wrestled with these questions as he walked through the city at night. Streetlights reflected in puddles, a quiet rhythm accompanying his thoughts. Every step felt heavy with meaning, every breath a reminder of the choices he had yet to make. He thought about the family who had raised him, who had given him love without asking for anything in return, and he felt gratitude. He thought of Cassandra, and he felt the stirrings of a cautious hope. They met again, this time outside the small park where he had played as a child. It was a place of memories, of innocence, of beginnings unspoiled by mistakes. She waited, hands clasped, heart pounding. He approached, his own nerves taut with anticipation. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, neither speaking, both letting the weight of years and emotions settle between them. "I don't know what to say," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible over the rustle of leaves. "You don't need to say anything," he replied softly. "I've carried my own understanding. And now, we both can start from here." Weeks turned into months. They shared meals, conversations, laughter, and tears. They explored old memories and created new ones. The process was slow, deliberate, sometimes painful, but always forward-moving. They discovered that the bond between mother and son, though fractured, had never truly broken. And the young man grew stronger, not just in heart but in spirit. He learned that life was defined not by the absence of mistakes, but by the courage to confront them, to face them, and to rise above them. His leadership, his vision, and his relationships all began to reflect this new wisdom. He treated those around him with compassion, tempered by the lessons he had learned from betrayal, loss, and forgiveness. One evening, as he stood with his father and Evelyn, gazing over the city skyline, he felt a sense of completeness he had never known. "Life," he said quietly, "is full of choices. Some are hard, some are painful. But the ones we make with courage, they define who we are." Cassandra approached, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. He smiled, and in that simple gesture, they shared 1,000 unspoken words. Apologies, regrets, hopes, and promises for the future. The past no longer haunted him. It was no longer a chain, but a teacher, a guide that had led him to understanding, resilience, and hope. Together, they walked forward, not forgetting the pain, not denying the past, but embracing the possibility of new beginnings. The city shimmered around them, lights reflecting in puddles and windows, a metaphor for the endless potential of tomorrow. And in that quiet moment, the young man understood that life was not about avoiding mistakes. It was about rising from them, stronger, wiser, and ready to lead with a heart open to love, forgiveness, and redemption. Time moved with quiet intensity. Each day carried its own weight, pressing down on the young man as he awoke with the memory of choices both made and unmade. The past lingered like a shadow, persistent and patient, reminding him of the roads he had traveled, the mistakes he had endured, and the love he had lost. Yet the present pressed equally hard. A world he had built, responsibilities that demanded his attention, and a future still unwritten, waiting for him to step into it with clarity and courage. He thought of Cassandra, of the woman who had walked away, leaving behind questions that had never been answered and a void he had felt every day since her departure. She had abandoned him, yes, but now she sought to return, to bridge the chasm between what had been and what could be. He thought of the family who had raised him, a father whose quiet strength had been unwavering, Evelyn, whose presence had been a soft light in the darkest moments, and he understood that forgiveness was not a single act. It was not a one-time declaration. It was a journey, measured in moments, choices, and steps forward, even when the path was uncertain. The decision to reach out to Cassandra was not made lightly. He had spent countless nights weighing the consequences, imagining the ways in which the encounter might unfold. It could bring relief, or it could reopen wounds, leaving them both exposed and vulnerable. And yet, the compulsion to confront the past, to see if reconciliation was possible, was too strong to resist. One evening, he decided to invite her to meet, not in a public cafe, not amidst the noise of the city, but in a place steeped in memory, a park where he had once played as a child, where hope had been simple and dreams had felt infinite. Cassandra arrived cautiously, her steps hesitant, eyes scanning the surroundings before they settled on him. She seemed smaller than he remembered, but in that smallness there was a dignity born of survival, a resilience forged through years of regret and reflection. Her heart, exposed and fragile, pulsed visibly in the way she held herself, as if every step toward him was both a challenge and an offering. He studied her carefully, seeing not just the woman who had left, but the person who had endured, who had carried her remorse like a heavy cloak and still stood before him. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice quivering with vulnerability. "You don't need to say anything," he replied softly, his tone even and measured. "I've carried my own understanding. And now, we both can start from here." Weeks turned into months, and what began as cautious interaction slowly evolved. Conversations lengthened, laughter crept back into their lives, and wounds began to close in ways that words alone could not achieve. They shared small memories first, the kind that did not sting, but brought warmth. Favorite foods, fleeting childhood recollections, and stories long forgotten. Then they moved on to the heavier truths, the nights of longing, the milestones missed, the silent years of absence. Each revelation carried pain, but also the beginnings of understanding. In parallel, the young man's life outside this reunion continued to flourish. His company expanded, bringing light to towns long forgotten, funding education, healthcare, and sustainable energy projects. In the act of helping others, he found reflections of his own journey. The understanding that growth, healing, and redemption were not merely personal experiences, but legacies one could leave in the lives of others. Each success reminded him that while the past shaped him, it did not dictate his future. As their connection deepened, he realized that forgiveness was not only about releasing her from blame, but also about releasing himself from the chains of resentment. Every moment of patience, every attempt to rebuild trust, became an exercise in humility and courage. They discovered together that the heart could stretch, accommodate, and heal in ways previously unimaginable. Every conversation was a negotiation of hope and fear, every shared memory a bridge toward understanding. He thought often of the family who had nurtured him, and of the lessons they had imparted: patience, resilience, love untainted by perfection. Evelyn's presence, steady and comforting, reminded him that support was often quiet, but unshakable. His father's wisdom, hard-earned through years of challenges, reinforced the importance of integrity and perseverance. Together, they had taught him that choices were not just actions, but reflections of character, and that the strength of one's heart could be measured in the willingness to forgive, even when it seemed impossible. In the stillness of late nights, he reflected on the transformation of his own heart. The anger that had once consumed him toward Cassandra began to dissolve, replaced by a tempered understanding. He could acknowledge the pain she had caused, yet simultaneously recognize her courage in returning, her willingness to face the consequences of her absence. And in that acknowledgement, he discovered freedom, the liberation that came from relinquishing the weight of past grievances. Cassandra, too, was learning. The vulnerability she had carried for decades became a source of strength, as she realized that reconciliation required not just apology, but sustained effort, honesty, and emotional investment. Each meeting, each conversation, became a step in rebuilding a life interrupted, a bond fractured by time and circumstance. Her humility, tempered with hope, allowed them both to see the possibilities of a shared future, grounded not in perfection but in resilience and choice. Amid these personal reconciliations, the young man continued to lead his company with vision and compassion. Projects that once seemed purely logistical were now infused with empathy, inspired by the realization that human experience, the spectrum of joy, pain, regret, and hope, was at the core of every decision. He understood that true leadership required more than intellect or innovation. It required heart and the willingness to embrace complexity without fear. One afternoon, standing on a balcony with his father and Evelyn, he gazed over the city that reflected his efforts, his growth, and his vision for the future. Life, he said softly, is full of choices. Some are hard, some are painful. But the ones we make with courage, they define who we are. Cassandra approached, the light catching the shimmer of tears in her eyes, though they were not tears of sorrow but of shared understanding. He smiled, and in that smile, they communicated what words could never fully convey. Apologies, regrets, hopes, and the quiet promise of a future forged together. The past no longer haunted him. It had become a teacher, a reminder, and a guide. He could reflect on the pain, the mistakes, and the absences without being bound by them. He understood that life was not about avoiding mistakes, but about embracing the lessons they brought, rising stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Together, they walked forward, side by side, not denying the pain, not erasing the past, but honoring it, and letting it inform a new beginning. The city shimmered around them, reflecting the limitless potential of tomorrow, and in that moment, the young man felt the fullness of life, the interwoven threads of love, loss, courage, and redemption. He had learned that life's greatest lessons were often found in its most difficult choices. Forgiveness was not weakness, it was strength. Love was not possession, it was understanding. And hope was not a fleeting sentiment, it was a deliberate act, renewed with every step forward. The story, he realized, did not close with a single ending. It was a continuum of beginnings, each moment an opportunity to choose courage over fear, understanding over resentment, and connection over isolation. And in this realization, he found peace, not as a destination, but as a state of being, a quiet strength that would guide him through every challenge and every triumph yet to come. The young man's journey had been one of transformation, from anger to understanding, from abandonment to connection, from isolation to love. And in embracing all that had come before, he finally embraced the fullness of what life could offer: forgiveness, redemption, and the enduring power of hope. Timeless Stories brings you narratives that touch the soul and keep you coming back for more. He learned that life is not about avoiding mistakes, but about rising from them, stronger, wiser, and with a heart open to love, forgiveness, and hope. The past had shaped him, but it did not define him. Every choice, every act of courage, had led him to this moment, a moment of peace, understanding, and new beginnings. As the city shimmered around him, he stepped forward ready to embrace whatever life had in store, knowing that even in the darkest times, hope could light the way. Subscribe now and join a community of story lovers, because every story deserves to be heard, and every moment is timeless. Turn on notifications and never miss a journey that will captivate your heart and spark your imagination. Open Book subscribe today. Your next adventure awaits.